Hi, and welcome to another episode of my podcast. Today I have on Tzvi Weiser. He is a LLC and corporate entity specialist. And some topics that we'll get into today include the Corporate Transparency Act and LLC structures, just some things to look for and maybe some dates and deadlines to have in mind. So, with that, let's get started. Hello, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. It's a pleasure to be here. I've followed you on LinkedIn, and I think you're an up-and-coming superstar. So it's great to have some time with you. I'll be able to say I knew you from the beginning.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. That means a lot. So, before I guess we get started, would you mind just telling us, I guess me and the audience, a little bit about yourself, like who you are and what you do, and how you can help people?
Sure. We can cut. I've done a lot of things, but we can cut straight to the real estate. So my background in real estate is only about 3 years old. I was into high tech, and I spent some time on Wall Street. And I started out actually doing 1031 exchanges for one of the large companies on the East Coast. This was talking about like 2, 3 years ago in the good days. We were turning over 25, 30 exchanges a day, which was pretty exciting. And it was like a crash course in all of real estate. And then I moved over to Riverside, and over there I'm working with the filings department. So we specialize in entity formation, helping you set up your entities. We give advice, although most of it depends on the beginners. Rely a lot on our advice, but the more seasoned guys already know the routine, and they got lawyers who make a lot of the decisions for them, and each one likes it their own way. They know what they want already. So we help set up those entities. And the exciting part is this year, the Corporate Transparency Act. Maybe it's exciting for us because it's a whole new thing, and probably less exciting for the people that have LLCs or want to get them. But it's actually, I think the fanfare and everything made about it is like, I think it's overhyped. It's not that big of a deal to your average person who's just running his own business straight. So, but a lot of that needs clarification and education, which the market and people don't know about yet, which is what I spend a lot of time doing nowadays.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Zvi, for that. I do think like that's very valuable for people. Like a lot of people have questions about that because it is a new thing, right? And I definitely want to get into that. But you mentioned before we started that you're actually in Israel, in Jerusalem specifically, and I guess I'm just curious about the city itself and some things about it, and also I know that some of my audience would be interested in learning more about the city, maybe some places to see if they travel there. So could you just I guess talk about some highlights of the city itself?
Sure. Well, what's unique about the city is its home and or the capital. I don't know capital, but it's a very holy city to three main religions. And what's interesting about the city, it's quite cosmopolitan. It's a modern city. That goes with traffic too, unfortunately. But there's something for everybody to see. So whatever track you're on, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's Judaism, or just if you're interested in history altogether, it's an incredible place. You see things, you can see a couple of thousand years of history in the city just by hitting some of the main hotspots. The old city obviously has got most of the attractions if that's your direction, and outside the city there's a ton of attractions. And then it's sort of a modern city which has you have your nightlife, you have your restaurants, all the modern things that you wouldn't want to miss out. During the day you have your history, at night you have just a great vacation spot.
Sounds very interesting. I'm definitely interested. I'm really interested in the old city itself. So, what I guess what are some like landmarks or things that are exciting for visitors there?
Right. So the old city is broken into four quarters. You got the Jewish quarter, you have the Christian quarter, you have the Muslim quarter. Now, there aren't too many Christians living in the old city. There's probably about 5,000 Jews and about 30,000 Muslims in the old city. Because after 67, well, the Jews couldn't come in after 48, but after 67, all the Arabs were allowed to stay and all the holy sites were respected. So the Christian quarter, what that really means, which is probably where the Christians did live when they were here, is that you have, I think, like 30 churches over there. Some obviously famous churches, the Holy Sepulchre, and some other ones. And so that would be the Christian quarter. And the Jewish quarter has most of the historic sites of the old city, the really old ones, because Christianity is about 2,000 years old, whereas Jerusalem, the Jewish Jerusalem, is 3,000 plus. So we have history over there from going back 3,000 years, which is pretty fascinating to see. And then you have the whole Temple Mount, which is really fascinating. Everybody, has claim to the Temple Mount, and the Jews have the most holy place in Judaism, which is the Western Wall. And then you have the Muslims on top, which I think it's a misconception because the wall is not holy to the Jews. It's actually the mountain that's holy to the Jews. But that's the last remnants of what was on the mountain, which is why we pray there. And unfortunately, we don't really get to go up there. There are people that go, but sort of for political reasons, they try to keep it to a minimum.
Got it. That's very interesting. I don't know like how what is the size of the actual like the city itself and then the old city? Like what do you could you compare it to something like here in the United States?
So I'll give you an example. I can't compare it to something in the United States because I don't know any city well enough to really see an analogy. But there's 35,000 people in the old city. That's the city between the walls. And until about 150 years ago, there was absolutely nothing going on outside the walls ever for 3,000 years. It was just mountainous terrain, maybe some villages here and there. And when they left the old city walls, when it got a little bit too crowded, they moved out to what they call the suburbs. But today, those suburbs have close to 1 million people, and the old city still has 35,000 people. So while the old city is about, I think, maybe 2.5, 3, 4 square miles big, then you got Jerusalem, which is just a sprawling metropolis. I mean, it's not Shanghai or New York City, but it's a 1 million person city.
Really? Wow, I did not know that. That's all very very interesting. Well, I think we should get into I guess the main reason that we're doing the podcast where we want to talk about real estate and specifically for those people that like I most people that invest, have some sort of entity like an LLC structure. Um, so let's get into the Corporate Transparency Act, which is something new. Just shed light on that, what it is, and how like what people should know about it.
Sure. So the Corporate Transparency Act was made, the way that LLCs grew, the nature of it, the whole LLC business is about less than 50 years old. And because the Constitution gives states, or it doesn't give the federal government power over commerce within each state, that's the state's rights. So states could control all the rules to commerce within their borders. And it started Wyoming, that they allowed this entity called an LLC, which is really a cross between a sole proprietorship, because that's how it's run and that's how it's taxed, and a corporation, which gives you limited liability. So it's the best of both worlds. Wyoming started it, and people realized it was a great tool to generate more business because it gave individuals the ability to grow businesses and start businesses with less risk. So it was one of the greatest things that happened to the United States. But the problem is, as all the states adopted it, everybody wanted the business. So LLCs became very competitive. The states were competing for LLC business. And therefore, each one made rules that played to the advantages of the state. So, Wyoming. Wyoming is great. It's cheap and easy to open up an LLC in Wyoming because whereas New York, it's expensive and there's taxes, Wyoming has no taxes. So one would think, let's open up a LLC in Wyoming. The reason why Wyoming does it is because they can't tax you. You have no reason to open up a Wyoming LLC other than the fact that it's a great place to have an LLC. So they make their money off of the fees that they get. And it's minimal, so they can generate more volume. There's far more LLCs in Wyoming than there are actual businesses being run there. Whereas a state like New York or California, they don't make it cheap to start an LLC, and then they tax you to death because you have to open up an LLC in New York if you want to do business over there. So they don't have to compete for the LLCs. The LLCs just come automatically as an outgrowth of the fact that the business is over there. So what you have here is Wyoming making rules, and this is just a very general example. I like to use Wyoming because they're on the far the far left or right, whichever. I don't know what's left and right in LLC world, but they're on the far end of the spectrum, and they allow you to be anonymous. There are a couple of states that allow you to be anonymous. So what happens is, if you want to do business in New York or let's say California, you can't be anonymous. But an LLC can be the member and the owner of another LLC. So what you can do is you can open up an LLC in Wyoming and then open up an LLC in California. When you have to report the owner, it's not you anymore. It's your Wyoming LLC. So you have anonymity. So people have learned the game, how to structure and layer all these LLCs together and sort of stay under the radar screen of the law. The state doesn't care because the state's needs are being serviced anyway. But the federal government has a big problem because you have all sorts of money laundering and drug trafficking and everything else that people do with their LLCs, with their shell companies. So the federal government, even though they don't control commerce, they do control the information and the security of the United States. So they've decided that the states, they can't do anything to the states to make them change their ways. But what they have decided, they've enacted a law that says if you own an LLC, you got to report to us who the owners are. We need to know names, real people. It doesn't make a difference how many layers or how many entities are stacked on top of each other. Each LLC, we want to know who the real owners are and who are actively controlling them. And that's so, one of the misconceptions is that there's no more anonymity with the LLCs because of this law. But that's, I think, a big mistake because the federal government doesn't publish this. State information is in a database. And if you're in the state database, the whole world can just, go into the database and see who owns every LLC, or at least what's reported on the formation statement. Whereas the government, they want to know the information, but it's for their own purposes. And it's not going anywhere, this information, only to security and law and regulators and things like that. So actually, the reason why I said that this whole CTA is overstated is if you're a law-abiding citizen and running a legal operation, you have nothing to fear. You just give the government your information, who you are, what your LLC is. They're not going to come after you because you have a lot of assets. That's not their intent. Their intent is just to make sure that everything's working properly and there's no crime being funneled through your companies.
Got it. Yeah, that was very helpful. And it's interesting that you say basically the anonymity is not going away, which is something that I like initially when I saw it, I was like, well, because I do have like I did that structure like the Wyoming LLC, and then I have a couple LLCs owned by that LLC. So yeah, that's because like one of the things I thought when I saw it was like, wow, like there goes there goes the anonymity, but like it's good to actually talk to an expert and get the truth about it, the facts about it. So thanks
Right.
for doing that. I guess so does this apply to anyone that do you have to have like 100% ownership or like a certain amount of ownership of the LLC to actually be required to do this?
So the rule is that the two people that have to be, it's called a beneficial ownership information report. And a beneficial owner is defined by the law as being anybody who has a 25% interest in the company or somebody who controls or is a decision maker in the company, which is any C-suite director or it could be anybody who actually calls the shots. 25% interest means even through options, through convertible instruments. So let me just give you an example because this is something else that people have big questions about. So let's say you and I own an LLC, we're 50% partners. But actually, it's not you and I, it's we each have an LLC that owns 50% of LLC A. Okay, you have LLC B, I have LLC C. You have three partners in your LLC B, which means that you're a 33% owner of LLC-B, which is only a 17 or 16.5% owner of LLC-A. So obviously on LLC-B, you're a substantial owner because you own 33%. Whereas when we're talking about LLC-A, you're not a substantial owner because you only have 17%. So when you're filing for LLC-A, this beneficial ownership information report, you're not on it unless you happen to be able to control LLC-A. But from a substantial ownership point of view, that's not you.
Okay, that's good to know. And also, so how hard is it to file this, first of all? And I guess, are there any fees associated with that?
Okay, so now I'm going to tell you something that I hope not too many people are watching your podcast because we're just going to destroy our whole business. You can file LLCs yourself. You can get an EIN yourself. Everything we do, you can actually do by yourself. But people don't do it right, and therefore they prefer that they give it over to a professional. That's where we come in. The same is true with the CTA. The CTA is a free service. You can go to the government, the FinCEN website. The government FinCEN is Financial Crimes Enforcement Network of the IRS or of the Treasury, more correctly, and you can file it yourself. But if people are scared of filing LLCs by themselves, they should be 10 times more fearful of filing the CTA by themselves, the BOI by themselves, because the rules are complex. And the filing itself you can do on a database, but the rules are complex and the penalties are very stiff. And what I see in this business, the reason why we're in business is because people don't like to deal with LLCs. They don't want to hear from them. They don't want to know about them. So, and if they do take care of it themselves, more often than not, a lot of their LLCs will not be in good standing, and some of them even dissolved by the state. We so many times we're a title company as well, and so many times we'll come to a deal and we'll find out that the LLC doesn't exist or it's not in good standing, which can cause all kinds of problems when you're trying to sell a property or to do a refinance. So because they just don't keep up with the rules, the laws, which is why we manage the LLCs. It's not so much the filing that we do, which is important, the filing, but it's also helping them understand the filing and continuing to manage it so they stay safe. Because when you're not in good standing, you are not entitled, your LLC is not entitled to use the court system of the state, which means if you want to sue somebody, you can't. And it means if somebody sues you, you don't have an LLC. They're going to go after you directly. So there's a lot of danger. And when it comes to the CTA, we're talking about a criminal act if you don't file it correctly or you don't do what you're supposed to do. So people would prefer to give it to a professional to help them through this process. So
Got it.
whereas
Yeah.
the CTA is free, obviously we take a fee for filing the CTA. We're on the low end of the spectrum. We don't get our business. We don't try to take more than we should get. We're not lawyers. If you go to a lawyer, I mean, CTA filing could be anywhere from 100 and change to $500 if you're using your lawyer. So, we're on the low end of that spectrum because we think that that's the value of the service that we're giving.
Yeah, that's good to know, and definitely consult with a professional. Reach out to Zvi if you have any questions regarding that. Actually, this would be a good time for I guess you to share, like, where can people reach out to you and find you if they have any questions.
We have a website. It's riversidefilings.com. My email address is T as in Tom, Weiser, Weiser at rsfilings.com. We got a phone number, 732-769-3999. That's my direct line. They can reach out to me, or they can
Awesome.
WhatsApp me to that same phone number.
That's good to know, and I thought that was very helpful for me. Like, a lot of those things I did not know. Actually, I do have a that brought up another question. um, you said one thing that you said about LLCs being in good standing. What are some things that people might neglect or just not think about that would cause an LLC to not be in good standing with the state?
Typically, two things. They don't file their annual report, or they don't have a registered agent. A registered agent means you need an address in every state that you're in where they can serve process. And if you don't have one, then your entity is not in good standing. Or if you don't pay your annual fees, then you're not in good standing. Now, typically, I always compare this to parking tickets where people get their annual filings. They don't know what they are. It just looks like some letter from the state for something or other. It's a small bill typically. They just put it on the desk and it never gets done. It's a funny thing, but that's just the nature of the beast. And same thing with a registered agent. We serve as registered agents. We take care of the annual filings for everybody, and it works. I mean, now obviously that's what we do for a living, so we make sure everything's tidy and there's no problems. At the end of the day, what happens is if they're not in good standing and they've gotten through without any lawsuits or any problems in the interim, when it comes time to sell, they'll just be paying all the money they never paid with high penalties, and If the entity was dissolved, it could cause problems. I mean, there's one classic example I always give. We were helping a buyer on title that was buying a property, and the property was, let's just give an example, 35 Main Street. So he went to the database and we filed a LLC for him called 35 Main Street LLC. We get the buyer had to send us his documents of his LLC and that it was in good standing. And he found out that all his taxes were paid. He didn't understand why. And then he realized that the buyer had paid his taxes because his LLC had been dissolved and the name was available on the database because he had used the same name, 35 Main Street LLC, and the name was taken. So now we had a situation where the buyer is buying a property that the title is in the name of the LLC that he already owns, that he bought for a couple $100. So
Wow,
he technically is the owner of this couple $1 million property for just the price of the LLC.
that is crazy. That is a crazy story. I had never. That's
It
something I had
happens
never.
more often than you would think.
I had never thought
I
of
mean, not to
that.
that extent. Yeah, but these things happen. We get calls from lawyers all the time. The entity was dissolved. We're going to closing. We don't know what to do, and stuff that we have to straighten out. But it will push off a closing. It will cost them a lot of money. It's just not worth it. It's better. And if you can't control it by yourself, the fees are so little. We make money by bulk, not by. We don't have any. What's nice about it, I don't really push sales because no one client means anything to us, unless they have hundreds of LLCs, which we have plenty of those. But we can share the truth and tell the people, look, it's a small fee, it's worth it for you. What are you talking about? You're talking about $100 a year extra or whatever it is. It doesn't make sense for you to try this. A lot of people have tried it and it hasn't worked out for them.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, like when I started LLCs like myself, I was like, well, I'll just form these and just kind of set it, forget it. But it doesn't work like that. There's the registered agent, also the annual filing, which I think
Right.
I knew about it, but I had kind of forgotten about it.
Right.
I don't think my home state of Ohio requires an annual filing. Do you know?
I don't know that Ohio doesn't require it. New York needs biannual. Pennsylvania needed once in 10 years, but they changed that now too. I don't remember anything unique about Ohio, but it's possible. You probably know better than I do.
I just because I
But
didn't
I will
receive.
tell you one thing.
Go ahead.
Now you're on the beginning of your journey. When you have hundreds of LLCs and you got property all over the US, call me up then. You'll need us for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the reason I kind of remembered is because I received an email from Wyoming saying, "Hey, this your annual filing, just a reminder for the annual filing," which I had completely forgotten about. So just another reason to have like I guess a professional in your corner to help just keep those things current and up to date. So I think that's very
Well,
helpful.
what's nice also, what's nice is that if you have property in a few different states, you're going to get for every LLC a separate mailing. And all the envelopes look different, the prices are different. And even if it's in one state, you'll get separate mailings and you're going to sort through all this, pay the $50 at a time, deal with all the different registered agents who you may know or you may not know, because when a lawyer hands it off to a registered agent, he'll hand it off to his friend. So you're going to get bills from people's names, different companies that you never heard of, and you'll be suspicious. It doesn't work. With our clients, what we do is we manage everything. So they just know what they have to pay every year. We take care of all the little paperwork, all the bills. We sort that out. And, we're a registered agent in 50 states. So it's just us that they have to deal with. So, it's a one-stop shop, one meeting a year to take care of all your LLCs.
Got it. That's super helpful. I do have a question about actually the process of setting up an LLC. Like you said, you can go ahead and just like it's from what I understand, it's pretty easy to do. Like just go on a website and do it. But I chose to I guess get someone to do it for me just because I didn't really understand it. Like what are some like the pitfalls of doing it yourself? Like what are some ways people can do it wrong?
First of all, you can make typing mistakes, but that's, not something we count on. It's misunderstanding what they're asking. It's missing pieces of information. Just remember that each Secretary of State has their own website. Some of them are easier to navigate. Some of them are much more difficult to navigate. There's states that I would tell people, don't even try it yourself. And there's states that, lawyers say, okay, we have the hang of it, we can do it ourselves, but regular people should not do it. So it's really, it's just how comfortable you are, how much time you want to invest in it. Most of these people are worth more. Their 2 hours of work trying to figure this out and hoping that it's right is worth more than the fee that we charge. And it's sort of a back and forth between the state. People don't know what happens. They push the button and they don't know. So like, do I have an LLC now? Do I not have an LLC? We provide certificates and you get confirmation from the state. Then you have to get the EIN number. It's a process. And unless you're really hard up for, 100 and change, it doesn't really make sense for somebody to try it by themselves. But again, there are people that do it just for the point of it. And they're probably the smart ones. They say, it's my LLC. I should know what's going on. Maybe that's part of the reason why people have such a, I would say, lackadaisical attitude towards LLCs, because they never really got into it and understood it by themselves. But it is a little bit hard to understand when they ask you about membership and managers and things like that, that sort of throw you for a loop. There are many people that have tried it and at some point just, thrown in the towel and said, you know what, screw this. I'm just going to call somebody up.
Hmm. Yeah, that I think it's good advice to just get someone else. Like it's so easy to just have someone do it for you, and then all of a sudden you should receive an email with your EIN and all the operating agreements and all that. So I'm the
Right.
sole owner of all of my entities, and I don't know
Hmm.
much about the operating agreements themselves, but I think that's very important especially once you get into like a JV with partnership with someone else, like understanding the
Right.
operating agreement, being able to, I guess, look what are some things to look for there.
Right. So I'll tell you on two fronts. I'll comment on both things. You talked about a partnership, taking a good look at the operating agreement. There's reason why, even as a sole owner, as a single member LLC, you really need to look at the operating agreement, because a lot of people will just download an operating agreement from the internet thinking, okay, what's the big deal? It's my own company. What's the difference what it really says? But single membership LLCs are in a tough spot today, because there are states that have decided that single membership LLCs don't have the protection that multi-member LLCs have when it comes to lawsuits. So just to give you an example, the LLC protects you from personal liability. Now, if you're in a multi-member LLC, if somebody comes after you, the only what you own is the distributions from the LLC. The LLC owns itself. You don't own the LLC. You may own the LLC, but you don't own the assets within the LLC. And they can't force you to dissolve the LLC. They can't force you to sell the assets. They can only get your distributions. So if you're in a multi-member LLC, you just don't distribute, and that's the end of the story. You figure out a way how to funnel money out some other way, and then the creditor can't take anything. But some states have made the argument that if you're the sole member of your LLC, why can't we take the assets away? The LLC belongs to you. It's all yours. If there's another guy in there, so he shouldn't have to suffer. But if you're the only one, then they can force you to dissolve the LLC. So this was a case. This went to some courts in different states, and the courts voted. Each state voted differently. Each state ruled differently. But some states have now legislated single member LLCs. So, for example, Florida has already decided that if you own a single member LLC in Florida, a creditor can come and force you to dissolve the LLC. And it's the same
Wow.
thing with a bankruptcy court, which is federal law. The courts have decided that for bankruptcy, it's possible for them to take the assets of the LLC. So that has made the operating agreement much more important, because even the states that are nice to single member LLCs, they look at all the details. If your operating agreement does not match exactly the way you're running your business, and there's a good chance it doesn't because you never read that operating agreement, they'll say this is a sham, and they'll pierce the corporate veil and they'll go right after you.
Awesome. Well, I
So
guess
the operating agreement is very, very important, whether it's single or multi-member LLC.
that's something that I did not know. I was like, well, I thought it was better, like easier to just have like that single member, but I actually don't think I've read mine. So I think that's something I need to do. Go in there and see what it actually says, and that was very helpful too. I'm
So
just like a kind of like a master class on LLCs so far, so it's good.
I'm going to drop you another tip that will be very helpful. In order to avoid the single member LLCs, if you have a spouse or a kid or anybody you really trust, it's very often worthwhile to make them a 2.5, or people argue if it's 2.5 to 5% member. So you no longer have a single member LLC. You have a multi-member LLC, and you can divide the profits however you want. You should make, again, over there, you should make it look like they're real members and treat them as such. And therefore you solve the whole single member problem.
Okay, that's a very helpful tip. That's thanks for sharing that. And I think you touched a little bit on the like the JV, like a partnership. What are some, I guess, some things to look for there, like disagreements in the operating agreement?
So I would say the first one you should look at is the transferability of assets or of membership interests. That's always an issue if somebody wants out, somebody wants to sell. Now, the thing with LLCs is that every state has their default laws, and you would have to check the default laws of every state. But the real answer is you don't have to check any default laws because your operating agreement can override almost all state laws when it comes to LLCs. So you should know exactly how you want to do it, whether if a person dies or he becomes incapacitated or he defaults and he doesn't give his capital contribution. All these things are things that you should think about depending on the nature of the business, how you want to deal with it. Now, another very important factor in the LLC is one of the great things about an LLC, and this is if the LLC is not run as a S corp. An S corp doesn't exist. There's no such thing as an S corp. You can tax your LLC as your own, as your personal profits, or you can tax it as an S corp. So when you tax it as an S corp, the profits are divided based on the shares because it issues shares, and it's a straight profit sharing divide. When it comes to an LLC, even if two people are 50% members, each one's a 50% member, you can actually allocate profits and losses on a different basis. One can have 30% of the profits and 50% of the losses. The other one can have 70% of the profits and 50 cents. You can do whatever you want. That's yours to play around with. So you could also do preferred shares. You can also have different voting rights for the members, despite the fact that that's not in line with their membership units. So there's a lot of flexibility with LLC, which is why it's gold. I mean, it's worth taking advantage of, and especially when you have a partner. You should take advantage of some of those things if you understand the business and you know what you want. And B, if you don't, and he's really drafting this, you should read it really carefully to make sure that you're being protected and it's written for you as well.
Yeah, and possibly reach out to maybe your guy, like if you're in that situation, reach out to someone like Zvi to just kind of read it over it for you, and maybe they can help you just make sure it's sound and something you want to get into for the audience. So um, I guess something that I've been considering setting up like a JV agreement for like a small apartment building. So I guess my question
Hmm.
is on that. Um, how do I want to word this? Let's say I brought in like an investor. Is there like a law that says like, hey, if I if they do not have voting rights, is this would that be considered a security? I don't know the answer to the question, so that's hoping you can shed some light on that.
So yeah, I mean, they could have no voting rights. You can be the manager of you can make an LLC where you're the manager and they don't have voting rights on operations. You could even decide a manager is given rights, and you write out exactly the manager's rights in the operating agreement. Does it extend to selling the assets of the company? Does it extend to doing mergers and acquisitions? What are his rights? Beyond that, there are some basic rights that if you can fire the manager, right? Somebody's got to be able to fire the manager. He can't. But everything is up for grabs. You can write whatever you want in an LLC, and that's up to you. So, like, the sky's the limit. Obviously, you'll get a lot of draft LLCs, but there's nothing stopping from you from just taking and writing in plain English what you want to say.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess my concern is like maybe like avoiding having to file for like an SEC exemption or something like that. So that's kind of why I asked that question. But it's just something that I'm thinking about doing. Bring in maybe one or to investors, like passive investors on an apartment deal. So yeah, it was
Right. You can
yeah,
have
really
Class A
interesting.
shares, Class B shares, that these have voting rights, these don't have voting rights.
Okay, okay, that's good to know. And once I actually have to want to go ahead and draft something, I will definitely reach out to you and get your help on that. But yeah,
With
I
pleasure.
think what was that?
With pleasure.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. I sorry. I was talking at the moment and I didn't quite get what you said, but yeah, that's very helpful. I think we're trying to wrap it up here. That was like kind of like a short master class on just definitely some things to look out for. So I like to switch gears. I always have like a few questions towards the end that I like to ask. So this podcast is named Real Impact, kind of like real estate and impact. So I'm curious, like most people, like they want to build wealth and make money and all that, but I'm curious, like for you, what does impact mean to you? Do you have like a certain things that you kind of like contribute to, like in the world?
Well, first of all, this whole LLC business, to me, it's exciting to educate people. And because they're all doing it, I'm not trying to teach people new things. I'm trying to help people understand what they're already doing and do it right and do it in a better way. Take advantage of the great tool that they have and understand it and not fall into the pitfalls. So, in my 9 to 5 job, that's the impact that I'd like to make LLCs a thing. A lot of the people we talk to, they don't want to hear about LLCs. It's like this a scary word for them, and I'm not really sure why. But I guess that comes from not being educated. So if we can educate people and help them understand the subject better, not be scared of it, sort of take it
Awesome.
into their own
That's
hands
very
and
good, and
own it,
I think you're
then I'll
providing
feel
a
that
lot
we
of
made an
education
impact.
today, and a lot of people will benefit from it. What are some? I don't know if you enjoy reading, but if you are, what are some books that you would recommend for someone to read? Anything like personal development or business wise?
So I've actually done quite a bit of reading the past year. Um, let's see. I liked one of the great books I read is called, I think, Critical or Crucial Conversations. I forgot who the author is, but for me, everybody's got different temperaments. I'm a little high strung. So for me, it was really a great read. It was helping me understand. There was another book, Surrounded by Idiots. That was quite a popular book, which, it's very disheartening, where you think, yeah, that's me. I'm surrounded by idiots. And then you read like the introduction, and before you finish the first paragraph, you realize that you're the idiot. So, and the rest of the book will just show you why and how to make yourself better. Um, those type of books. I've read a lot of sales books because I've never really been in a sales role, and that's sort of I led a sales team when I was hired for the job, so I read some great books on sales. Just comes to mind Jed Blount. He's fantastic. He's the king, I think. David Brock. They both got fantastic books. Anthony Iarvino, I think that's how he pronounces his name. Also a great book. I mean, I will tell you, when I started in business 30 years ago, I feel terrible that I went so long and just figuring it out by myself, or I don't know if I ever did figure it out by myself, but trying to figure it out by myself. And then you come to fast forward to 2023, 2022, and for $8 on Kindle, you get all this knowledge, stuff they never taught you in school, just the way things actually work, smart ways. I still grew up in the cheesy salesman era, and today, everybody's smart today. The whole world is really smart. They understand the way things really work. There's no games anymore. Psychology is like incredible how they've really dug to the depths of everything that we do. And it's just, I say, you want to know what to read, just get a Kindle and don't stop. Open up one book, then the next book, then the next book. There is so much wisdom out there, and take advantage of it. Figure out what your areas you'd like to learn about, what you're weak in, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, and just don't stop reading. Sure. I think I answered that question already. I tell them 3 words. You're an idiot. My only question is, which age would I have to meet myself to stop saying that? I'm afraid it would probably be like after 50 something. LinkedIn. Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I love getting reached out to on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's amazing. I consider all the people on LinkedIn my friends. It's not a show. I talk to a lot of people offline, and I think it's the greatest thing that happened in the past 20 years, LinkedIn. Thank you, Kyle. Stay in touch. I'll see you around LinkedIn. Great. Thank you, Kyle.